So to get started, I owe Sue an explanation. I couldn't do it last week, but the week prior, she brought up, I was covering in Mark 14, we were talking about Passover, and we were talking about specifically how serious of a remembrance Passover would have been. It was not something for people to take lightly. It wasn't something where people could choose to participate or not choose to participate. It was a command by God in recognition for how He delivered His people by that final plague. He had told His people, Pharaoh will let you go, and He took the firstborn. And as you recall, He had very explicit instructions on what they were to do to prepare and to ensure that when the Spirit of God washed over the land, it would pass over those of His people. And so we talked about firstborn, and I certainly have always, maybe not always, I guess, at least in my mind, as I recall it, it was the firstborn males. And Sue had brought up, where does it say that? And so here's what I determined. Here's what I've found out. So take it for what it's worth. NIV translate it as the firstborn males. The NASB does not. So what does that leave us with? Well, there's two words here, and I'm going to do a horrible pronunciation of them because I don't speak the language. Bechor Zakar, and Zakar, so the New American Standard Version translated just firstborn, just the original, Bechor. So there's some commentary suggesting that the implication is striking down the firstborn males. Exodus 34:19, God identifies the firstborn that belonged to Him and all your male livestock. But the Hebrew word Zakar is included in that, and that's the word that limits it only to males. That's the same usage in Exodus 13:12, the same usage in Exodus 22:29, talk about dedicating the firstborn. It talks about the males. And it's also the same as in Deuteronomy 15:19. So interestingly, in the passage we read over the Passover, the word Zakar is absent. The word Zakar is absent. So, I'm sorry, the word, yeah. And the fact that the word Bechor, which literally means the one who opens the womb, the oldest offspring, is used in the original Passover, and it does not include the word Zakar, where other passages do, would suggest that is the firstborn. So, that's, there you go. You're welcome. Yeah, and according to this, it's just the firstborn. So it could be, it is very interesting that that word is specifically left out of the original text. So anyway, there you have it. Feel free to take a look at those verses on your own. If you have a Vines, you can look up the actual literal, the original language as well. So that's where we're at. So we've been through chapter 14, and there is a study guide. I haven't really used it. I don't know that any of us that have been teaching have been using the study guide. It comes from the Sunset School of Preaching. But there's one thing that I did think was interesting for those who like to kind of compartmentalize a passage into kind of understanding a progression. And what it kind of showed is chapter 14, verses 1 through 11, there's a choice. It's talking about the choice between man and how they can treat Jesus. So verses 1 through 11, anoint or scheme. Verse 12:25, this guide called it remember or betray. Verses 27 through 52, it highlighted between stay with him or forsake him. And then 53 through 72, follow him or deny him. Or if you're Peter, you followed him and denied him. So, in those passages. So, anyway, so we're going to be starting in verse 43. Rob, yes, Eric.
When you were fighting earlier about the Passover and how serious it was, we have now, today, Christ is more important than Passover.
Oh, that's...
Every Sunday, he's greater than the Passover in my mind.
Absolutely. So if you didn't hear what Eric said, is how serious Passover was, and that's what we were talking about. We're saying, what should these priests have been doing in preparation for the Passover? They should have been taking this with all seriousness, preparing for it, recognizing what God had done for them as a people, but instead they were scheming and trying to find a way to kill Jesus. And what's interesting is that Passover that Eric's talking about, like each Sunday now, is more important than Passover because we come together for what purpose? To take communion, right? That regardless of a Jewish people today that still celebrate Passover, is there any reason to celebrate Passover? Not with Jesus. So Jesus really partook of the last Passover that was commanded by God. Because once God gave his son, that was all done away with. One sacrifice. And Jesus in God's wrath then did what? Passed over us because of the blood of his son, right? Great point. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the text. We'll be starting in verse 43. As you recall, we had just finished up with Jesus in the garden, and he had prayed, and we see the humanness of Jesus. We see one who is deeply grieved, and it says he falls to the ground. Now, it could be falling to the ground, one, an acknowledgement of worship, one, it could be out of fear, one, it could be out of simple stress and just the physical stress of what he's going through. He falls to the ground, and when I read this, I can't help, but my grandmother had a picture of Jesus in the garden, painting. I'm sure it's a famous painting. Someone here might know who did it. But I don't. I just remember it was always there. And it's this serene setting. And Jesus is kneeled peacefully on a rock with his hands folded, looking up to heaven. And there's a little lighted halo around his head. That is not the picture that is supported by Scripture. Deeply grieved, if you've ever seen someone really in emotional distress, maybe the unexpected passing of a very close loved one or a loss of a child, this is deeply grieved. So keep that in mind. I can't help but see that picture because all my life I saw it every time we went to visit her. Of course, then I didn't really have a knowledge of the word. But yeah, deeply grieved. He comes out of that, and of course, he talks about the apostles not being able to keep their eyes open. He asks them to be alert, be on guard, that they won't fall into temptation. And in 42, where we left, get up, let us be going. Behold, the one who betrays me is at hand. All right, so that brings us, we're going to go ahead and read. I'm going to read verses 43 through 52. Immediately while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, came up accompanied by a crowd with swords and clubs, who were from the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. Now he who was betraying him had given them a signal, saying, whomever I kiss, he is the one. Seize him and lead him away under guard. After coming, Judas immediately went to him, saying, Rabbi, and kissed him. They laid hands on him and seized him, but one of those who stood by drew his sword and struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his ear. And Jesus said to them, Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me, as you would against a robber? Every day I was with you in the temple, teaching, and you did not seize me. But this has taken place to fulfill the Scriptures. And they all left him and fled. A young man was following him, wearing nothing but a linen sheet over his naked body, and they seized him, but he pulled free of the linen sheet and escaped naked. Okay, so verse 43, immediately while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, came up accompanied by a crowd with swords and clubs who were from the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. So if you had read nothing else, in the Bible up until this point, that's the only verse you've read, who must this Jesus and his disciples be like? What must they be like? Rebels. Dangerous. You would have thought they would have done something really wrong. Anything else, Eric? I think you might have spoke up to. Yeah. So a crowd has been gathered, armed with swords and clubs. I mean, there could be some logical explanations for this. Example, maybe Judas could have told them that some of Jesus' disciples were armed. But we're going to see a few verses further down that Jesus had no intention to resist. The time set forth by the Father for the fulfillment of his prophecy and the ultimate sacrifice that was to come. That's what's at play here. So verses 44 and 45, now he who was betraying him had given them a signal saying, Whomever I kiss, he is the one, seize him and lead him away under guard. After coming, Judas immediately went to him, saying, Rabbi, and kissed him. What does a kiss symbolize? Yeah, affection. So in the first century, around this time, it symbolized affection. It symbolized a greeting between two acknowledging companionship, and it also symbolized the recognition of authority by the one that was given the greeting, right? So isn't that interesting? Well, that's a little different. It comes out of Paul's letters, but greet one another with a holy kiss. Maybe Paul was. I don't know that there's any tie to this particular, but that's a little bit different. So acknowledging this authority. So you think about the hypocrisy of this, right? We already know that Judas has been scheming. This isn't something that he just decided to do a moment ago. He's been scheming before. He saw the opportunity. We know, we get a little look into what Judas is motivated by in his heart. He had been thieving and pilfering from the money box. He was making some comments about the use of the perfume to anoint Jesus, or the oil to anoint Jesus, and making it sound like he was really concerned for the poor and what they could have done for the poor had that perfume been sold. But we know that in his heart, he really just wanted the money to be put in the money box because he had been pilfering and taking it away. So this has been going on. So really, you see the hypocrisy in Judas as he comes up, and that's the signal, right? That's the signal that he's told them, that the one that I kiss, that's the one you need to seize and you take him under guard. And in verse 46 it says, they laid hands on him and seized him. So literally meaning they forcibly arrested Jesus. So here's a question for you. When is all of this happening? Yeah, late at night. It's all happening under darkness, right? All happening, so guesstimate somewhere between midnight, 2 a.m., but happening in the dark of night. Any comments or questions? It's pretty straightforward so far. Yes, Candace. Yeah, he definitely would have been. You're going to see, right, he's been actually teaching in the temple. The question was, wasn't Jesus pretty well known for people to have recognized him? I suppose, just textually, if you look at the fact that Judas is going to acknowledge the one that is to be taken, that There could be amongst this crowd, amongst all the Sanhedrin, there could be some that might not be as familiar with them. Lynn, you had a comment? Betrayed? Yeah. Right. I think you're going to see a lot of that, right, is the fulfillment of prophecy regardless of man's knowledge, regardless of man's, well, we're going to see that for sure with Peter. We're going to see that for sure with Peter. Glenn.
They don't live in a modern world. These are people that would have experienced Jesus or may have experienced Jesus at different times.
Yeah.
Crowd of people that are running around at midnight, 2 a.m. in a city like Jerusalem are not the people that are sitting in the temple in the afternoon listening to him teach.
Right. That's a good point.
It's a different group of people altogether. And they wouldn't necessarily have recognized it, but they've probably heard of him. They've probably heard of his name and probably know about him.
Yeah.
The fear that they show by coming armed to take him shows that they're afraid. They're afraid. They know that he has been one to do miracles and to do things that they don't understand. And there's almost a fear with these people coming with, to me, the group here is more like a crowd in a Frankenstein movie coming to take a monster.
That's actually what I thought about this morning. It was like the one that's yeah.
They're coming to find that they're not people that are understanding or who have been seeing him every day.
Yeah.
They're probably people that sleep in the daytime.
That's a really good point.
But they probably heard of who he is and heard about him, so that's why they're fearful.
Right. That's a really good point. So I mean, the crowd. There could very well be a difference between those who are attending temple day, and those that are part of this crowd that have been. Because the chief priests have been trying to keep everything at arm's length. Like they want this done. They want Jesus to be done away with, but they're kind of separating themselves from that. And they're going to try to do everything to give all appearances like there's been due process. Like they're going to make it appear like there's due process. But the crowd very well might. There might be people in the crowd that have been told to go get this guy that have no idea. Richard, do you have a comment as well?
From a real practical aspect of a crowd and a gathering and dark at night.
Yeah.
They want to get the right person.
Yeah.
Also, prophecy indicates he was not outstanding in any way in terms of his looks or anything. He would have been very,
Yeah.
we talk about, what he looked like. He was not, extremely tall or good looking. Prophecy said
Yeah.
he was very comely or he was not, but.
Good point.
And to meeting, and I'm just thinking of the lighting they had probably at that point in time.
Yeah, there's no park lights there after dark.
He just knows him. He'll get him.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that it wouldn't be above them to think, all right, you don't betray us.
Right.
They don't trust anybody.
Yeah. So they want to make sure that they've got the right guy.
You get the right guy.
Yeah.
We're not going to sneak in because Peter was a talker. And he had other apostles who caught in alongside him. So there's a practical aspect of that. Just
Right.
crowd control in general. And there's other people around. And there's you can be in a group sometimes and you think somebody did something. Who was that? And people kind of get to look alike.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. And you don't want to deliver the wrong guy to the chief priest, right? That would be. But anyway, good comments. But so let me find where I'm at here. So they arrest him, and then verse 47. One of those who stood by drew his sword. We know this from other accounts to be Peter. Struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his ear. So here's a question for this is something I was considering because I always just looked at this and thought, well, we absolutely did it on purpose. Does this show a little bit of Peter's heart? Do you remember what Peter told Jesus when Jesus told him that you're all going to deny me? Do you remember what he said to him back in, was it verse 31, I think? Yeah, Rick said it, right? Even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you. I mean, was there some heart in Peter? Absolutely, right? So, I'm guessing that it was not a surgical strike with the intention to take off just Malchus's ear. I'm guessing he's aiming for the head. So there is this part of Peter that you see a little bit of his heart. Even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you. But do we know when he's actually faced with proclaiming who Jesus is, what he does? Yeah, human nature. Linda said human nature takes over. So he was, from what I understand, I look at this and I see that Peter truly was sincere in potentially giving his life for Jesus. It certainly appears so. And again, if he took off the ear, you could presume that he was likely attempting to strike at the head. But when it came down to truly standing up for Jesus, we know that Peter is going to do exactly as Jesus prophesied, and he's going to deny him. So what you see here is God's plan and prophecy. Here's the question. Is it the disciples' time to die for Jesus? No. Why? They have work to do. That's a really good way to put it. There's work to be done. This is what Jesus has been doing for the past 3 years, has been training them up to deliver the gospel message to the world, to all nations. So there's work to be done. So you can really see God's hand, one, in fulfilling the prophecy, but also in ensuring that his greater plan is also going to be carried out through these men. So God's will is going to prevail. Luke's account, I'm not going to do a lot of flipping back and forth between the gospel accounts. As I had said before, one of the things this time, someone made a comment about, man, I've read a lot of Mark for a long time, but is understanding that this gospel was intended to stand on its own. There was a period of time, it's the first one written, and it needed to stand on its own. So I do a lot, but I do think it's interesting. Luke gives an account of Malchus' ear being taken off, but what does Luke include? Yeah, it includes the healing. Jesus heals Malchus. Last miracle or physical healing that's going to be performed by Jesus. And of course, what's interesting about that is Luke is a physician. So you can kind of understand why that would really stand out. I wonder what he thought, that he would call that out, like he touched his ear and he healed him. I wonder, and this is just me wondering as I've been going through the verses, if the crowd witnessing any of this, witnessing who Jesus is, who maybe they were convinced that he was before they grabbed their club or their sword, and seen his response and see him heal the ear of Malchus. I wonder if there's some that would have misgivings. What are we doing? What's going on here? I don't know. It's just my wondering. So let's go ahead and move on to verse 48 and 49. And Jesus said to them, "Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as you would against a robber? Every day I was with you in the temple teaching. You did not seize me, but this has taken place to fulfill the Scriptures." Jesus says, "Swords and clubs to arrest me as you would against a robber." Was Jesus hiding from them? No. Was he on the run? No. Every day. Now, we've already talked about it. They're doing all of this when? During the daytime? The dark of night. When was Jesus amongst them? In the day. In the light. Was he hidden away in someone's house, or was he out and about in public? He was out and about in public. Eric?
Many times in the gospel, I know Mark, but almost any of the gospel, many times they try to get hold of him, but he seems to slip away.
Right.
Every time, not at hand.
Right. And Eric pointed out there's other times, especially when there's one particular account where they get him up against like a cliff, and it says that he passed through them. He just passed through them because it was not his time. So we do still see exactly that as God's will being fulfilled, the prophecies coming to fulfillment kind of right before our eyes. But he wasn't hiding with them, from them. He was in the temple teaching them, and he says, with or among you. I was one of you. Like, this has been the case. I haven't fled. I haven't been running away. I haven't acted violently. I've been among you. I've been teaching you. And that's interesting as well. He certainly doesn't appear that he was prevented from teaching. He's been going to the temple, and he has been teaching. So why is it taking place? God's will to fulfill Scripture. And he said that's why this is happening in verse 49. But this has taken place to fulfill the Scriptures. Lost my spot, sorry. Yeah. So Isaiah 53:12. Let's go ahead, and you don't have to turn there, but everybody is probably pretty familiar with Isaiah 53. So instead of, approaching Jesus in the daylight when he's in public and saying, hey, we have some questions we'd like to bring you in and ask you about, they're going to seize him, forcibly seize him, and put him under guard. And it's going to go further than that. But he says, verse 53:12, God through Isaiah tells us, therefore I will allot with him a portion with the great, and he will divide the booty with the strong, because he poured out himself to death and was numbered with the transgressors. So numbered literally means reckoned as. He was considered as, and transgressor literally means a rebel or a criminal. So when we talked about earlier on, when you say, when the crowd shows up and they've got clubs and they've got swords, and you didn't read anything else, what would you think Jesus is? You would think he's a rebel or a criminal. He's done something really bad. And you see, God said that's exactly what would occur, that he would be reckoned as a rebel, as a criminal. In verse, this is just something that dawned on me. Let's go ahead and turn to Luke chapter 12. And this really is not a parallel passage, not intended to be. It's the words of our Savior in regards to light and dark. And it's just really for consideration, something that came to my mind as I was reading this morning. Luke 12, starting in verse 2, but there is nothing covered up that will not be revealed, and hidden that will not be known. Accordingly, whatever you have said in the dark will be heard in the light. What you have whispered in the inner rooms will be proclaimed upon the housetops. I say to you, my friends, do not be afraid of those who kill the body, and after that have no more that they can do. But I will warn you whom to fear. Fear the one who, after he is killed, has authority to cast into hell. Yes, I tell you, fear him. So think about Jesus and what he knows of his Father, and all of this that they believe they're doing hidden within darkness. Is it going to come to light? Yeah. I mean, here we are a couple thousand years later, right? I mean, it has absolutely come to light. Did Jesus know where he needed to place his faith? Did he need to be fearful of man that were going to destroy his body? No. He had reverence for his Father, to do his Father's will. Any comments or questions before we move on to verse 50? Okay. Glenn. Yeah. So Glenn's point is who they sent. We know, slaves. I actually, I had some thoughts about that too with the servant girl that's going to come up.
Yeah, and it's interesting that Peter targets this it doesn't talk in this book about the healing,
Right.
but interestingly, it does talk about who he was,
Mm-hmm.
and that Peter has targeted him probably because of who he was.
Potentially. I understand what you're saying. I don't know if Peter was targeting anybody or if he was just, if he was just swinging his sword at the person closest, closest to him.
I'm just going by the fact that Mark's probably getting this story from Peter.
That is true.
Peter's highlighting
Yeah, Mark is considered Peter's gospel account, really. Yeah.
and this is what he's sharing.
Yeah. Definitely some possibilities there.
To me, it's interesting that that's the case. And it's also, it does show, though, as you were talking about in the past, about coming to life. Because, like, cutting his ear off, and then that ear later being healed, all that, it showed that the chief priest representatives were there.
Yeah, yeah,
That's who they were dealing with.
yeah. So it is interesting the crowd was, we know, at least comprised of some slaves. So these are people that would have the authority, they would not have authority and they would not have the right to question the authority of those who sent them to do what it is that they have been tasked with doing. Richard?
Well, John records also there's a Roman cohort there.
Yeah,
Yeah, so you've got the Roman government helping the Jews,
right.
awful alliance that because they didn't like each other,
Yeah.
That's how they started, but that's how significant this was event. We're going to even bring the Roman,
Yeah.
the Roman folks.
Absolutely.
You've got to really get this crowd.
Right. So then verse 50, it says, every day I was with you in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me, but this has taken place to fulfill the scriptures, and they all left him and fled. Who fled? All of them. All of them left him. So, also the fulfillment of Scripture. And as actually pointed out, Mark 14:27, Jesus points that out to them in reference to, back to Zechariah 13:7, awake, O sword, against my shepherd and against the man my associate, declares the Lord of hosts, strike the shepherd that the sheep may be scattered. And so they are all going to flee. And then the last two verses there, 51 and 52 of this section, a young man was following him wearing nothing but a linen sheet over his naked body, and they seized him, but he pulled free of the linen sheet and escaped naked. And this is the only gospel account that includes that. That's Zechariah 13:7. That's the only gospel account that actually talks about this. So there is, and this might, take it for what it's worth. Speculation, this possibly could have been, the young man possibly could have been John Mark. Because the only gospel account that includes it, it would require an eyewitness account. So someone that saw it, or it was that person. And really, at the end of the day, it's not all that important who it was. It's just, there it is. So, all right, so moving on, let's go ahead and read verses 53 through 65. They led Jesus away to the high priest, and all the chief priests and the elders and the scribes gathered together. Peter had followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest, and he was sitting with the officers warming himself at the fire. Now the chief priests and the whole council kept trying to obtain testimony against Jesus to put him to death, and they were not finding any. For many were given false testimony against him, but their testimony was not consistent. Some stood up and began to give false testimony against him, saying, "We heard him say, 'I'll destroy this temple made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another made without hands.' Not even in this respect was their testimony consistent. The high priest stood up and came forward and questioned Jesus, saying, 'Do you not answer? Was it that these men are do you not answer? What is it that these men are testifying against you?' But he kept silent, did not answer. Again, the high priest was questioning him and saying to him, 'Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One?' And Jesus said, 'I am. And you shall see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven.' Tearing his clothes, the high priest said, 'What further need do we have of witnesses? You have heard the blasphemy. How does it seem to you?' And they all condemned him to be deserving of death, some began to spit at him, to blindfold him, and to beat him with their fists and say, "Prophesy." And the officers received him with slaps in the face. So verse 53 and 54, they led Jesus away to the high priest, and all the chief priests and the elder scribes gathered together. Peter followed him at a distance. Is there a willingness and desire in Peter to be with Jesus? It seems to be. He goes right into the courtyard and sits himself amongst the officers. So there is some courage. But will that courage be lasting? No. How is this like us as people today in the church? Can we sometimes have a conviction to get really close to Jesus and an intention on what we're going to do and what we're going to follow through on, and then when faced by the struggles or temptations of the world, not quite hold to what we had planned? Leroy.
Well, I'm pretty strong when I'm around you guys.
That's a really good point. Leroy said, I'm pretty strong when I'm around you guys, right? When we're surrounded amongst the saints, right? But how are we when we're in the world, right? Not a question really to be answered, but a question to be considered. So that's a question I had for myself. Where would I have been after I fled the garden and he's been taken forcibly? Would I have been close enough to go on into the courtyard of the high priest? I'd like to say I would, right? Just like I would like to say when Peter asked if he could walk on the water with Jesus, I like to say I'd be one of the ones leaping out of the boat too. But it's really easy to say. It's really easy to say. So verse 55 through 59, the chief priests, the whole council kept trying to obtain testimony. Where is this so-called trial being held? Is it being held like a normal trial? No. Luke chapter 22, verse 54, it's the house of the high priest in the middle of the night. And it just so happens that the whole council's gathered. Right? So in the middle of the night, did they have ready witness testimony? No. The chief priest and the whole council kept trying to obtain testimony against Jesus to put him to death. So they kept trying to obtain testimony, but not just any testimony. They need the kind of testimony that's worthy of a death sentence. Were they able to find that testimony? No. They weren't finding any, it tells us. In verse 56 through 59, we learn that the testimony itself was contrived. So they were trying to find people to speak against Jesus. It was false, so it was just wrong and incorrect. It was inconsistent. Verse 58 and 59, he says, we heard him say, I'll destroy this temple made with hands, and in 3 days I'll build another made without hands. Even in the statement that Jesus himself gave, it says to us, they weren't even able, not even in this respect, was their testimony consistent. So held in the high priest's house, in the middle of the night, no actual witnesses, testimony that's contrived, false, and inconsistent. And the question is, are these the actions of honest and righteous, God-fearing men? No. So, how depraved had God's priests become? Consider who they were and what their charge was. How depraved, right? So who actually gives the final testimony that advances the case? Jesus himself. Because he's going to testify when he is asked specifically, are you the blessed one? He's going to say, I am. I am. He kept silent, did not answer. Again, the high priest was questioning him and saying, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? I am, and you shall see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. And then it says, so Jesus is the one that gives the final testimony to man worthy of death, right? To man, a testimony that he is the Christ is seen as worthy of death, blasphemy, treating what is holy as common. Jesus has made the claim, I am God's Son. I am the Christ. But what's the problem with their conclusion and sentence of blasphemy? It's false. Why? Because he is. Because he is God's Son. He is the Christ. And look at that, every single one. That's pretty interesting if you consider the entire council said all condemned him to be deserving of death. And then right after that, and we'll end here, verse 65, that's when added verbal abuse then starts to see physical abuse. It's accompanied with being spat at. They mocked him and blindfolding him and shouting at him to prophesy. They beat him with his fists. They slapped him in the face. And when he's delivered to the officers. And where is Peter at this time? Yeah. Peter is still warming himself by the fire. So we're gonna go into Peter's denials here next week. I was hoping to get through it this week, but it's not going to happen. Roger, you have a comment?
Yeah, it kind of ties into that, where in John chapter 3, verses 21 describe, if you're doing evil, you do it without fear, because your evil deeds will be exposed.
Right. Yeah, John chapter... That's right. Yeah, and even today, when's most crime committed? In the dark of night. Lynn? I think they still are.
What do they expect? How are they going to know then if they can't let him say he's the Messiah? You know what I mean? Like, what
Right.
do they expect him to say?
Right. What do they expect him to say? And, right. Even now, right? Yeah. And what you're seeing is a people whose hearts have become hardened. They have placed themselves in the position of the people's advocate to God. And they had a choice between sustaining what they have in this world and their authority and power, and they're choosing to try to do that. And at the end of the day, what they end up doing is fulfilling every bit of God's prophecy for who his Son is. And to this very day, they're still looking. So, hey, thank you, everybody. Sorry I went a couple minutes late.
Again. Hide me, O my Savior,